All right, all right, all right. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Coach as Awakener. Oh, let me turn on my video. Here I am. Hi, everybody. Here, I'll stop sharing screen. I just wanted you to know the title of this. And it's great to see you guys. So many friendly faces and a few people who I'm meeting for the first time. Um, for those of you who don't know, my name is Jamie Smart, and I'll probably take the liberty of telling you a bit about myself at some point, but I'm not going to rush into anything here. But I've really been looking forward to this because we're going to be we're going to be exploring a topic that's very close to my heart and looks more relevant than ever to me. I don't know if you've had this experience, but when I first started exploring the domain of, what I'll call coaching, therapy, change work, training, group work, all of this stuff, I was kind of dazzled and fascinated by it. And there were all kinds of things which I heard about that so and so could do or that was possible and that sort of thing. And most of it I kind of wrote off as kind of that's not even real. And yet, whatever it's been, has it been 27 years later? Um, there are things that I can do today which would have looked impossible to me. Like I would have if someone told me about them, I would have just said they were made up back then. And there are phenomena I see with my clients, transformations they go through, levels of impact I see my students and my colleagues having that would have been in the miraculous category before. And one of the things I've realized is that over the years, while people, come to me for all sorts of things, they want to focus on business results, or they want to make changes around their self-concept or their health or their relationships or their well-being or their financial situation or whatever it might be. What we come back to again and again and again is that kind of step one, if you like, is to get them in touch with, well, what is it that you really want? What is it that your heart desires? Because for so many of us, we've grown up in a world and in a semantic environment where we're given all kinds of ideas about what we should want, about what a good life should look like, about the kind of person we should be, the kind of things we should be interested in, all that sort of stuff. But what I know for sure is that every single one of us is a unique being, and we have a unique and distinct source of wisdom and guidance within us, that each of us is born with unique qualities and gifts and capacities. And it may sound fanciful to say, but I'm going to suggest that each of us is here for a reason, and that there's a bigger and deeper wisdom and intelligence behind life that has brought each one of us into this world for very specific purposes. And that well, I want to share. I want to share. I didn't know I was going to start here, but I'm going to share a quote with you. I read this quote. So a little bit about me. Back in the 1990s, I managed programs and projects for large organizations. But I started exploring this domain of change work, and I was reading all kinds of books and that sort of thing. And I came across a book with a quote in it from a guy called D. Ward Hawk, who was the founder of Visa, of all things, like the Visa card. But he was quite the hippie and quite the leadership thinker, interesting guy. And he said this thing in this book, which I found really, really fascinating. He said, we're at that very point in time when a 400-year-old age is dying and another is struggling to be born, a shifting of culture, society, and institutions enormously greater than the world has ever experienced. Ahead, the possibility of regeneration of individuality, liberty, community, and ethics, such as the world has never known, and a harmony with nature, with one another, and with the divine intelligence, such as the world has always dreamed. Now, I read that and it touched something in me, and it's been kind of a beacon for me ever since. It's like, oh, okay, there's somewhere we're headed. And I know in times like these, when, there's wars going on and there's you can take your pick of the different crises that are underway in one form or another. We've got the climate crisis and the mental health crisis and the economic crisis and the this and the that. And I understand, and I'm not diminishing any of those, but there's a way in which, when it comes to systemic change, things kind of break down before they transform and reorganize at a new level. So yeah, and there are plenty of sayings about this, like it's always darkest before the dawn and that sort of thing. But anyway, my sense has always been that there's a more beautiful world that's possible for us. And it's not guaranteed, by the way. Like, there's a wonderful quote by a guy called Howard Thurman who said, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, then go do that. Because what the world needs is more people who have come alive. And that looks true to me when I talk about the unique source of wisdom and guidance within you and the unique gifts that each one of us is here to bring to the world. That looks to me like the best path we've got, if you like, to uh, to vote for the possibility of the kind of world D. Ward Hawk described. Anyway, so that's what I'm interested in these days, and that's what I love sharing. And I feel very, very lucky to do the work I do. Um, the title of this masterclass is The Coach as Awakener, and I wanted to explore some questions basically. One of them is what do you mean awakening? What is that? One of them is it relevant to coaching clients? And if yes, how? So that's another question. Another one is, why are so many coaches being drawn to the role of awakener? Also, oh, I've got too many R's in that sentence. Let me remove one of them. That's better. What does it take to awaken a client to who they really are? And is that something you even have permission to do? And that's something we can talk about because uh, I don't know if you're anything like me, but if you're fast asleep and some gink comes along and tries to wake you up, you're not necessarily very happy that they're doing it. I mean, my response is often, "Go away! Can't you see I'm trying to sleep here?" So there's something about permission in this. Um, uh, how do you approach that when maybe your clients just want to lose weight or make money or find a partner or all the different things that people come to you with? And is awakening even relevant in those cases? And so I'll make a case for why it might be, and then I'm going to suggest that each of you, speaking to you as coaches, therapists, change workers, you need to, make up your own mind about that. You need to have a conversation with your clients about that as well, if that's something you want to be doing with them. And then the final question is, what's essential when it comes to waking people up to who they really are. And what I was going to say for this session is I'd love to take questions from you guys. If you've got them, feel free to ask them at any point. We're going to go for a maximum of an hour, and then maybe I'll come on at the end and ask for questions again, but feel free to ask them anytime. And yeah, let's just have an explore. Like, one of my objectives for this session is for us just to find our way into a nice feeling together and explore, because there's a way in which the answer to the question, what is awakening, um, it kind of implies some stuff. And one of the things it implies is that most of us, at least some of the time, are asleep. And I don't just mean, uh, asleep in our beds. I mean, sort of living in a dream world, you could say. And one of the ways I see the notion of awakening is it's about awakening to the truth and beauty of who you really are. And then you might ask, well, what do you mean who you really are? And I'll give you, this is a way of thinking about it. There are many ways of thinking about this, but I'll give you a way of thinking about it, which is like if you go into gallery mode on this, if you're not already in gallery mode, go into gallery mode, and I'll bet that you can pick yourself out on the screen. You can look at yourself and go, oh, yeah, there's Stephen, and there's Shadrach, there's Jamie, there's Miriam, there's Deborah, there's Johanna, there's Kate and Chris. Yeah, yeah, I can. You can pick yourself out on the screen. You can go, yeah, that's me, right? Can everyone do that? Like just confirm, yeah, you can do that. But there's a way in which that you that you see on the screen is a is it reminds there's a story about Pablo Picasso who was on a train crossing Europe, and a businessman said to him, Mr. Picasso, why don't you paint things how they actually look? He said, why do you paint those crazy things? Why don't you paint them how they actually look? And Picasso said, well, what do you mean? And the guy reaches into his wallet and takes out a picture of his wife. And he says, well, this is a picture of my wife. This is what she really looks like. And Picasso looks at the photograph and says, tell me, is your wife really this small and flat? Because Picasso instinctively understood that the process we go through to look at a third person perspective of something and then say that's what it is, that there's all kinds of distortion and transformation going on. So when you look at that picture of yourself on the screen, that's an image that you learned to identify at a certain point after you were about 18 months old, right? Up until a child is 18 months old, they can't pick themselves out of a set of photographs. They don't recognize themselves in a mirror because they haven't yet created a self-image. And so there's a very real way in which that image you see on the screen and that you can identify and go, yeah, that's me. That's the face I wash in the morning. That's an image of you, a third person perspective on you, taken from the perspective of a camera from a distance away. But that's not who you are to yourself. That's not the you were born being. As the Buddhists sometimes say, that's not the face you were born with. See, when before you learn to identify with that image of self from a distance, you were who you are to yourself from 0 millimeters away. And that's a you that each of us got taught to replace with this idea of self, with this self-image, with this image of self from a distance away. But here's the thing, that image of self, I don't know if yours is anything like mine, but mine keeps getting older. It gets lines in it. It's changing all the time. But who you really are, the you were born being, that doesn't change. That's eternal and timeless. That's spiritual. It's spiritual. And that you is the source of all insight and creativity and guidance. It's the source of peace and joy and love. It's the source of inspiration and enthusiasm. And speaking to you as a coach, my experience is that you is the seat of your desire, your true desires, your authentic desires, your heart's deepest longings. And so it seems to me that when it comes to coaching, there's a way in which reconnecting with or awakening to that true self is the surest path to finding the goals and objectives really worth having, discovering a life really worth living, and all the things that go on and go along with that. But we can talk about that. We can talk about that. You know, I'm making all kinds of assertions here. I don't ask you to take my word for it. I encourage you to, uh, uh, establish, make up your own mind about it. You know, as they say on the internet, do your own research. I find that one of the things we have available to us as possessors of a human nervous system and a heart and a spirit is the ability to self-experiment. So I encourage you to do that. So, little bit about me. Uh, I had a vision. So, quick backstory. For anyone here who doesn't know, um, in 2009, I'd built an NLP training company in the early 2000s, quite successful, that sort of thing. And then in 2009, I stumbled across the three principles as articulated by Sydney Banks, and I started having insights. And my first insight was, oh, everything you've been looking for outside of you is already there within you. And that immediately started reorganizing my priorities, right? My second insight was a few weeks later, and I realized, oh, the fact that a person can even see or hear or feel or perceive means they have the source of mental health and well-being and resilience already there within them. Like I didn't know that before. From my explorations of NLP and coaching and change work, I had this idea that people had all the resources and that was a useful thing to believe. Like who's heard that? People have all the resources they need, right? We all know, yeah, that's a useful idea. But I went from having that as a useful thing to believe when I was working with a client to knowing it like you know your own name, knowing that the fact that they can even have a human experience means they have that source of resilience and realization and transformation within them. So that immediately made me way, way more hopeful for every client I was working with. And when you're that hopeful for your clients, when you have that level of certainty in what they've got going for them, it makes it much easier for them to change, it turns out. It makes it much easier for them to transform. Anyway, my third insight in June of that year, I suddenly realized, oh, these are principles. This understanding is to psychology what the discovery of germs was to medicine. So I called up my office that day. I said, there's principles for psychology. We're changing direction. And I've been doing this work ever since. I wrote my first book, Clarity, in 2013. I've written several other books since. Uh, and what a wild ride and what a gift to be able to share this understanding with people. And over the last year, what I realized is that what I'm most committed to is you can think of me, or I'll tell you, you can think of me however you like. How I'm thinking of myself now is as an advocate of awakening. And by advocate of awakening, I mean that in two senses of the word. One is kind of as an advocate for awakening, like explaining to people why it's relevant, why it's a good idea, and that sort of thing, which I might do next, actually, but also advocating for it. Like when I'm working with a client, there's a way in which I'm there on behalf of awakening. Self-appointed, obviously. But yeah, that I think of my role in that in a coaching session, for instance, to be acting on behalf of awakening. I'm honor bound to tell my client that because it means I'm less interested in their specific goals and objectives than I am in them waking up to who they really are. So I need to be forthright with people about that when I'm working with them. So if I do a demo with anyone later, be careful what you wish for. Um, so, in relation to that, I had a vision, which is everybody on the planet awake to their innate capacity for clarity, resilience, and well-being. Everyone on the planet waking up to who they really are. And the evidence for that would be the first generation of children born to parents who've already realized that. So children growing up in homes where the parents and the whole family know who they are and what they've got going for them, which is kind of cool because that's already happening. Many of my clients, their kids are growing up in those homes. My personal mission is to awaken people and support them in awakening others. So that's part of what this is about tonight. I want an ideal for me is that any one of you wake up more and more fully to who you really are in the next 40 minutes. So we've got a ticking clock. I would love that. I would love it. You know what I would love even more? If I wake up even more fully to who I really am. I'm up for that as well. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, if you've got questions, feel free to ask at any point. I'm happy to make this a discussion if you like. I don't have I mean, there's a structure here, but I don't have any particular structure that I want to take you through. But I do want to answer those questions or speak to those questions I spoke about on the first slide. So let's do that. So in no particular order, well, there is an order actually. It's the order I went through in the slides. What is awakening? Well, I'll give you I'll show you a slide my beloved Emma McDevitt thought up, which I think is quite brilliant. Um, at the bottom of the triangle there, you can think of the bottom of the triangle as the three principles, or as universal energy, or as God, or as the oneness, or the divine intelligence, or the implicate order. It's everything in form and in formless is at the bottom layer. So you can think of that as the wisdom and intelligence behind life. And it's everywhere. It's everywhere and nowhere, baby, as Jeff Beck said. Um, so that's at the deepest level. Then in the middle, we've got the local instantiation of that non-local totality. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. You know how gravity, the principle of gravity, is operational everywhere in the known universe? You guys know that, right? Operates at different strengths depending on where you are, but it's everywhere in the known universe. However, there's a local instantiation of gravity, which means you're not floating around your room. Your bum is affixed to your chair, or your feet are on the floor, or whatever, and you're not floating around the room as you watch this because gravity is acting locally on your body. So there's this non-local principle that's everywhere, but it's acting locally on you. Well, the principles of mind, thought, and consciousness, which are formless and non-local and everywhere, there's a local instantiation of that divine intelligence that resides at the heart of your being. And there's a word for that in all kinds of different cultures. Some cultures, they call it soul. Some people call it the true identity, the true self. More poetic folks might refer to it as the heart of your being, or your true nature, or your spirit. But it's the spark of the divine that dwells in you. And, in our society, especially I live in the UK, and the UK is quite a secular society. But the notion of spirit shows up all over the place, whether it's team spirit, or the Christmas spirit, or, whatever. Like it's still the notion that there is something beyond this physical instantiation seems to be well understood and well considered, even in domains where people don't really have much time for that kind of thing. But I'm saying, as far as I'm concerned, the most, to some degree, some of the most important aspects of who you really are spiritual, because that's not only the truth of your being, it's the source of your wisdom and guidance, it's the source of your heart's desires, it's the source of your unique gifts, your unique qualities. And all of that sits at the heart of you. And then at the top, you've got your ego identity or your personality traits, right? And we've all got personalities. We've all got ego identities that we've developed over time. I'm very partial to mine, as you may have guessed. But the thing is, for all of us, to a greater or lesser degree, there's a way in which that ego identity is kind of at odds with who we really are. And one way of looking the journey of, the spiritual journey or the journey of personal evolution is of bringing our idea of who we are, our conditioning, whatever you want to call it, more into line with the truth of who we really are so that we can be in service to life, that we could, so that we can be in service to what life is wanting to have happen through us, right? So So my own experience is the process of bringing that ego identity more and more in line with the truth of my being is A, slower than I'd like it to be, and B, less comfortable than I'd like it to be. Anyone else? It's like I'm totally down for the version of that that's basically like an extended spa day and feels lovely and involves a lot of massage and nice feelings. But for me, a lot of the time, seeing through that stuff, it's more kind of like, oh God, not that again. It's like it's waking up to that stuff. And sometimes that happens really quickly. So for Sid Banks, it happened kind of his initial big wake up came over the course of 3 days, right? Like he within a very, very short time, he went from being neurotic and miserable and anxious and constantly worrying and that sort of thing, to the happiest, most peaceful person anyone he knew had ever met. And we're having this conversation today because he had the insights he had 50 years ago, right? Like there's a direct line between those insights and what's going on here. And in my case, I've always been down for that. I'm still absolutely up for having the very fast uh, ego death, sudden awakening that Sid Banks had. But I seem to be on track for what William James referred to as the educational variety of spiritual experience, which is much more gradual than I'd like it to be. I like things to happen fast and to get it over and done with, but in my case, it has been much more gradual, but no less valuable and impactful for that. And I see this with many people, we'll get on to how is this useful for clients and coaching and that sort of thing. But when I was running clarity certification training, I'll give you a couple of examples. One weekend, we did the kickoff weekend for the program. So a 2-day weekend. And one of the clients there, a woman called Christine Mitchell, she's a coach, and she came to this first weekend and she'd been exploring the principles for a while, but it really hit her so deeply that weekend. So she goes home to her family, and her sister had had severe OCD for decades, like for 30 years, unable to go out a lot of the time, constant hand washing, having to take her own cutlery to restaurants, all kinds of stuff. I've interviewed Christine about this. So her sister, she gets back from the first weekend. Her sister's asking her what she was learning. And so Christine's just talking with her sister, having a really peaceful, settled down conversation with her. But her sister can tell that there's something different about her. And what she's saying is really landing with her. And after a couple of hours of conversation, her sister suddenly goes, oh, I don't have OCD anymore. Like that, like sudden awakening to the truth of who she is and how her experience works from her sister who had had a similar experience. So, a similar experience in awakening to something deeper and truer about who you really are. So, when I'm talking about the kind of so-called miracles that people can often do once they've awoken to something like this, they don't even have to be in the context of a formal therapeutic engagement, right? Um, so anyway, so anyway, which gets us where? Which gets us to, so what is awakening? As far as I'm concerned, awakening is awakening to who you really are and what you've got going for you, which is another way of saying waking up from a dream of insecurity and not enoughness, and waking up from a set of false ideas about who you are. There's a way in which, well, I'll tell you, it's kind of interesting. I love going to the movies. Anyone else like going to the movies? I love going to the movies. So I go to a movie theater at least once a week, right? Love going to the movies. And one of the things I've always thought is pretty amazing about movies is, you're sitting there in the seat, and in a decent film, within 10 or 15 minutes, you're responding to stuff on the screen as though they're happening to you. You're ducking if something comes at the action hero's head, or you're welling up with emotion, because there's a phenomenon that the neuroscientists call transparency. And the idea of transparency is that when we look at something and we identify with it, there's a way in which our consciousness kind of occupies it, right? So that can happen within 10 to 15 minutes of watching a movie. You start to identify with one or more of the characters on the screen, and then you respond as though what's happening to them is happening to you. Anyone had that? You've all had that. Yeah, definitely. Uh, Even if it's like you've all had that. Now, if that can happen within 10 or 15 minutes of watching a movie, what do you suppose happens when you've been looking at that little square on the screen, that idea of self for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? In a world where parents and teachers and bosses and politicians and priests and media figures are telling you all the time what you're like and what you're not like and what you're capable and what you're not capable of. Well, all those stories about what you're like and what you're not like and what you're capable of and what you're not capable of, none of those have anything to do with who you truly are. They're all just data that gets stored in the self-image, but they're nothing to do with who you really are. So, a simple way of thinking about awakening is it's a waking up from an illusion about who you thought you were, and re-identifying with the you that you really were in the first place, re-identifying with your true identity, knowing who you really are. And in my experience, the only way that that ever happens is through insight. There are all sorts of methods for doing that, depending on which traditions you look at. But the reason I'm such a huge fan of the principles is it's the most reliable thing I've seen for giving people an awakening experience and giving them the experience of waking up to who they really are without having to spend years in meditation and satsang and that sort of thing. I think the principles are unique, or the only thing I've seen that can allow everyday folks like me to have a profound awakening to the truth of your being without having to, go on pilgrimages or all that sort of stuff. So the awakening in the terms I think of it is that you have a source of truth and beauty and intelligence and power and wisdom and insight and gifts and desires within you. And you've innocently been identifying with another idea of yourself. And so awakening is to fall awake from that imposter of who you aren't and wake up to the truth of who you really are. That's what awakening is. And that's why I think it can be really useful for coaching clients. Is it relevant to coaching clients? And if yes, how? Well, it seems to me that the way in which it can be profoundly relevant to coaching clients is the fact that someone's coming to you for coaching or change work in the first place means that there's something they're feeling called to, drawn to, something they want to accomplish, or something they want to solve, or something they want to experience, or someone they want to be. And it seems to me that there are two possible sources of that desire, right? One possible source is it's what their mom told them they should want, or what their society or culture told them good people want, or that sort of thing. But the other possible source of it is it's coming from the truth of their being. Now, the beautiful thing is when you align someone with the desires that are arising from who they really are, it comes with a built-in source of motivation, confidence, courage, commitment, follow through, all that sort of stuff. Because it's the real deal. It's the organic, built-in, authentic desires that life has placed in them from the get-go. So that's why it's sort of a trick question because I think, yes, it is relevant, and that's how. That's how. Um, why are so many coaches being drawn to the role of awakener? Well, this is my take on it. So this isn't true, right? This is just how it looks to me. You know that quote I read from D. Ward Hawk at the beginning about where at a point in history when a 400-year-old age is dying and a new one is struggling to be born. But ahead is the possibility of, I'm going to say it, a world of genuine abundance for everybody, even the possibility of a post-scarcity world, a post-war world, um, a world where our relationship with each other and with nature is genuinely healthy and positive, that looks possible to me, right? Doesn't look likely. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. It looks like a possibility, but it looks like a slim possibility because the there's a way in which, there's a quote by E.O. Wilson. He said, the problem with humanity is we've got Paleolithic nervous systems, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Well, that's still true, right? Like our institutions and our tribal habits are medieval or Paleolithic, but our technology is godlike. And so I think if we're gonna live into the kind of beautiful world that D. Ward Hawk described, it's going to take as many of us as possible being true to ourselves, being true to the wisdom and intelligence behind life that's guiding us. And that's going to take awakening and it's going to take courage. Um, And so my way of thinking about it, you may have heard the term the meta crisis or the poly crisis. Anyone heard those? I hardly anyone, right? I learned something about the neighborhoods I hang out with. It's just a kind of blanket term for all these different things that are going on, climate crisis, political crisis, economic crisis, all that stuff. I don't know what anyone should do. And like the world's pretty complicated. I don't know what anyone should do. However, I trust that if people wake up to who they really are, they'll know what to do. And so the one thing I know to do is to help people wake up to who they really are. And it's one of the reasons I feel very, very grateful to have stumbled across these principles when I did. I feel very grateful to be part of a community where people are interested in looking in this direction. And, it seems to me that as a society and as a species, we're heading into probably the most disruptive period in our history so far. We're heading into a time of massive transformational change and disruption. And so I think the reason so many people are being drawn to awakening is because the world needs it. There's a wisdom and intelligence behind life. And the reason it's guiding us all in the directions it's guiding us, the reasons we've got the curiosities and the interests and enthusiasms that we've got is because that's what life knows the world needs. So that's my assumption about why so many coaches are being drawn to this. We're in a humanitarian crisis of mental health. And, in the UK, if someone goes to the NHS with mental health issues, they get 6 sessions of CBT, which, not to diss CBT, but that's kind of like throwing a baked bean at a charging rhinoceros, given the millions of people who are suffering with mental health challenges. So I think that there's going to be a much greater need for sane human beings. I was listening to a podcast with an AI leader of an AI company the other day, and he was saying that one of the most prized uh, one of the most prized phenomenons in the future is going to be people who are able to think clearly, people whose perception hasn't been completely befuddled by uh, technology and tribalism and social media and that sort of thing. So I think that there's a greater than ever need for human beings to awaken to who they really are. And I think that's why so many coaches and therapists and change workers are being drawn to this. So what does it take to awaken a client to who they really are? And is that something you even have permission to do? I don't think it is something you have permission to do. And I think if you want to do that work with a client, you probably need to get their permission first. You probably need to tell them, what your philosophy of transformation is. Like when I first work with a client, I tell them my philosophy of transformation. My philosophy of transformation is that you have a source of wisdom and intelligence and truth and beauty and resilience and transformation within you that has the capacity to transform your life and guide you to a life that is the perfect fit for you. That's the life you were born to live. But that may mean you letting go of some of the things you've held as true and important until now. And it'll be an adventure. And not everyone's up for that. And it's okay if you're not up for that. And sometimes people go, yeah, I'm not up for that. And that's fine. That's fine. But that's the nature of the work I do. I don't want to do it without permission. Um, And so, well, let's jump to what is it? Well, actually, we'll go to we'll talk about what does it take in a sec. I was going to say, how do you approach that when your clients just want to lose weight or make money or find a partner? Is awakening even relevant in those cases? I'm going to say it is, but you still need to have the conversation. You still need to have the conversation. Like if someone is wanting, well, I'll tell you how I see it. If someone's working on health or relationships or business or whatever it is, my assumption is everyone is already doing what makes sense at their current level of understanding. So if they're experiencing themselves as stuck, that's what's been making sense at their current level of understanding. So the thing that's going to open them up to new possibilities is going to be insight. It's going to be realization. And so I'll tell them that right from the get-go. Like that's my approach to it. And as your level of understanding increases, then the things that make sense to you will change. And that'll mean whole new vistas will open up for you. But things that used to make sense won't anymore. So life's going to change. So are you up for that? So I'm going to say it is relevant to any coaching client, any therapy client, but that doesn't mean they want it. So you got to have the chat with them. And then we get to what does it actually take to wake someone up to who they really are? Like, well, the essential elements, number one, you need to go there first yourself. If you want to wake people up to who they really are, you've got to be awake to who you really are. You've got to be in touch with that source of truth and beauty that resides at the heart of your being. Because your most your biggest advantage when it comes to communicating with another person about who they really are is who you really are. Like, this isn't a theory that you tell someone and they go, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll wake up to who I really am. This is experiential. I'd even say there's a way in which it's like energy work. There's a way in which you could say, when you're hanging out in the knowing of who you really are, other people can catch it off you. So I think that's the first thing, the first essential when it comes to waking people up to who they really are. You need to go there first yourself. You need to be awake to the truth and beauty of who you really are. And I'm going to say the more you're living that in your life, the more powerful that'll be. Many of the people I've been mentored by, people like Jan and Chip Chipman, a lot of what made the difference to me was seeing the ways in which the truth of their being informed every aspect of their lives. So that's the first essential is you need to go there first yourself. Second essential is embodied understanding, when it comes to working with clients on the complexities of their life and the changes they want to make. I think it's really important to be able to see how the truth of who you really are and your understanding of how human experience is created, to see how that's playing out in their lives, to see how that's creating the results that they've been getting until now and has been stopping them from getting the results that they want to get, and to see how that aligns with what they're wanting to bring into being in the world. So your embodied understanding of the principles and of who we really are and how people change, what I call your philosophy of transformation. It's an embodied understanding of that. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is, and no one really mentions this. Well, I mention it, but very few people mention this. There's a way in which, whether you want to call it waking people up to who they really are, or principles-based coaching, or sharing the principles, there's a way in which that's an unusual kind of communication skill. It's a communication skill. And so it's one thing to awaken deeply to the truth of your being. And it's quite another thing to communicate with another human being in such a way that they do the same. So it's a communication skill. And it's one I've spent years, learning and teaching and supporting my students and my clients in developing. I'll tell you another story. Um, One of my clients, a clarity coach by the name of Farah Hussein, she was working as a therapist and a supervisor of therapists in a therapy center. And this particular therapy center, they all basically got what were called core scores, which were clients when they came in and started therapy, they did a bunch of, tests and things to score them on a bunch of different scales. And then at the end of their therapeutic engagement, they would do the test again and see how things had changed. Well, once Farah had woken up to who she really is and could see that, she could then see it in her clients. Her core scores went through the roof, like they were beyond anything anyone else in the place was getting. That's because not only had she seen it for herself, but she was able to communicate with her clients in such a way that they saw it as well. So I think those are the big three things you need. Number one, you need to go there first. You need to be awake to that within yourself. Number two, you need to have an understanding of it and how it's playing out in your clients' lives. And then number three, there's a communication skill when it comes to communicating that. So just a heads up, next week we're going to be sending out some communications about some stuff we've got planned around all three of those. So keep your eyes on your inbox next week. Listen, we've got like 9 minutes left. I'd love to answer questions. You can either type them into the chat or uh, just come on and ask. I'd love to hear some other voices. I mean, clearly I don't mind the sound of my own voice, but I'd love to hear yours as well. It's nice to see everyone here. Thank you for being here with me. So yeah, what questions or comments or uh, you name it, just put up your hand or type it into the chat. You let me know. Or are you all set? Like, is there nothing you're curious to know about or explore in relation to this? Go ahead, Laurie Holmes.
I'd like your take on this, Jamie.
Shoot.
I have returned. So I'm a massage therapist for 40 years, and I've been coaching since like 2013-ish. And I have discovered through all the things that have come my way through those years that I'm able to connect the core belief, the thing that people have created themselves to be, not who they are.
Mm.
And it has shown up in the body as a thought or a picture or words or whatever it may be. And it's a very powerful thing that happens when I see how, this whole structure of us, mind, body, soul, is literally projecting outward and inward. We're feeling exactly what it is that we're thinking and
Yeah, for
believing.
sure.
Yeah.
Is there a question in there somewhere, Lori?
Um, well, in the awakening bit of it, right? So I'm working with clients, and it's kind of like coaching, massaging. And so that part of them is waking up. Is that something that I would mention to them ahead of time to get their permission?
Well, what have you found in your work with them? Because you've been doing a bunch of this, right? What have you found when you do that work with
Well,
people?
I say I get messages. I don't really use those words awakening or anything like that.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I say
I
that,
don't, yeah, I don't think you need to use the word awakening. I think as long as you're being respectful with your client and trusting your own intuition about is it okay to do something or do I need to ask permission? I think that's going to be your most trustworthy guide in this. Like you're already working in a very intuitive and impactful way. So I think just trust your intuition on that.
yeah, thank you. That's what kind of what I've been doing, but I was just curious.
Right on, Lori. Great to see you. Go
It's good
ahead,
to see you.
Rasha.
Excellent. Hi, Jamie. Thanks for,
Nice to see you.
yeah, lovely to see you. I wonder if I've got a similar question, really, but my curiosity is around like, when you when you speak to people about awakening or and potentially not speaking to people about awakening, but you mentioned that's your skill, that's what you know what to do, how to do it. But obviously, like, well, again, not obviously, but I see that people are in different stages. Like some people absolutely not recognizing that there even is such a thing as awakening,
Sure.
and so like, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you not deal with it, but how do you interact with that? Like, how do you.
It's a great question. I'll take a shot at an answer and then you
Okay,
let me know how I'm doing.
okay.
So a way of thinking about it, Rasha, is that when you sit down with a new client,
Mm-hmm.
there's a way in which they've got a philosophy of transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got a philosophy of transformation. Their philosophy of transformation includes whatever they think needs to happen in order for them to achieve what they want to achieve, or whatever they think is broken about them that means they can't achieve what they want to achieve. So they've got their philosophy of transformation, and you've got your philosophy of transformation, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, uh, my starting point is always to find out what's their philosophy of transformation. How do they think this stuff works?
Mm-hmm.
Where do they think, if I ask them the kind of questions I'll often come in strong with early in a session is like, what would be a wonderful result uh, for you? If we were to work together and a year from now I bump into you and you're like, oh, Jamie, it's amazing. The work we did together, most amazing transformation. How would you know? Like, what would let you know? So I'll get them in touch with that. Then I'll find out, how did you arrive at that conclusion? Where does that come from? So I'm wanting them to get curious about how they know what to want, what to desire, what to consider important, all that sort of thing. So it's very much a matter of my starting point is always Russia to do my best to get their world first, because then anything that I think is going to make sense for them or whatever, I can contextualize it in a way that's going to make sense to them. So, for instance, if I'm working with the CEO of a fast moving software company, I'm not going to say as what you need to do is just slow down and just these that's not going to resonate at all. I want to find out like how does he know or she know what objectives to set or when do they get their best ideas so I really want to back into it rather than just say, well, here's my theory about what you need and that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Does that
brilliant.
make sense, Rasha?
It totally does. I mean, like what I'm hearing is, like it's this idea that, like, let's just say awakening, you're recognizing that that is the solution, but not many people understand or that solution. So you've got to like figure out what's their problem, what's their area that they want to solve, and then the fact that you're actually working together, it's like that there's slow kind of merging of different, like your transformational process could slowly merge into their world and it just slowly happens like that, but you're focusing on solving their problem.
Exactly. And what I'll often find is I'll like if I'm doing a 3-day intensive with a client, maybe a business owner or something like that, we'll get partway through the second day and they'll say, I feel kind of like I used to feel when I was a kid in summer holidays or that sort of thing. Like it's very much different states and that sort of thing. I'll often just wait for them to mention spirituality before I start talking about it. Like I'm not in a rush to mention it. And I'm also not necessarily going to use the word awakening with them because it might have all sorts of uh, associations which aren't necessarily going to be useful. So I want to make it easy for them to look in the direction I'm pointing.
It's really lovely to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you. That was
Thanks,
useful.
Rasha. Go ahead, Ria. Lovely to see you. This is going to be our last one, then I'm going to wrap it up for the night because we can't believe that was an hour. Go ahead, Ria.
Yeah, and lovely to be here. Thank you. Um, Yeah, well, actually, I was going to ask you about, you mentioned a tech podcast you were listening to, and I was really interested to know which one was that? It's
I
only
can't
because I'm
remember.
just,
I probably listen to a
ah,
dozen AI podcasts
yeah,
every week. So it'll have been probably with either Imad Mostak or Salim Ismail or Peter Diamandis or one of those. Yeah, maybe
okay.
Gadot. Uh,
Oh,
but
Gather.
but it's one of the themes that's coming up in
Yeah.
among AI leaders and AI researchers. So if you're interested in that space, you'll definitely hear it mentioned.
Okay, yeah. It's only because I actually, like yourself, it, you know, the more I use AI, the more you become it's actually works so well with awakening and giving you extra power for confidence in yourself and things like that. And actually, yeah, I absolutely just really enjoy using AI, and I think it's such a positive thing.
Well,
And I
may
think
you
for
may
coaching, it's fantastic. It's
I'm
absolutely fantastic.
it's funny you mentioned that, Ria. Coaching and companionship and therapy are the number one use case for individuals this year with AI, which is interesting. I While I think it's very interesting, Ria, I'm not as quite as positive as you about AI. I think it's going to be profoundly transformational, and I think it's going to bring huge challenges as well. But as with all these things, I think the way that you uh, I think it's better to ride the wave rather than get hit by the wave. And so I encourage all of you to follow your own wisdom and intuition in terms of the degree to which you engage with that stuff, the degree to which you don't, and the way you use it for yourself. Funnily enough, on my podcast, I'm doing a series of episodes at the moment, conversations with Andrea Del Teddo on my team called the Rope Bridge Conversations. I'll tell you this real quick and then we'll wrap it up. Because the way it looks to me, that quote I read at the beginning from D. Ward Hawk about this beautiful future, I do think that's a possibility, but it looks to me like the period between now and then, maybe the next 3 to 7 years, is going to be like an Indiana Jones rope bridge that we need to get across as a society and as a species. And there are all kinds of, broken planks and arrows firing by and, flaming boulders and all the things that they have in those movies. And so getting across that rope bridge is going to be a genuine adventure and is going to, in my opinion, require all of us to wake up to the best of our ability to who we really are so we can contribute to each other and to our own lives and to the world in the way that makes sense for each one of us. So, if that's interesting to you, you can find it on my podcast. We'll be saying some more about all this stuff next week. Thank you all for being here tonight. And I will see you again soon. Lots of love to you all. Thanks, Ria. Bye, everyone. Bye.